1. This story happened in early December of 2018. It was Christmas break, so I was back home from college and staying with my parents. I live on the second floor of my house, just above the sliding back door. It's a fairly heavy door, so anytime anyone opens it or closes it, I can hear it. Our house was built in 1940, so it creaks a lot, and sound travels through the walls pretty easily. We live in a relatively safe part of town too. The strangest people we've ever gotten are magazine solicitors, and even they stopped coming around a few years ago. We've never come anywhere close to a break-in. Admittedly, I'd gotten into a bad habit of smoking weed out of my bedroom window after my parents went to bed. Most nights, by midnight, I had my window open anywhere from 30 minutes to 2 hours. It depended on how tired I was, how cold it was outside, etc. I would leave it open to air out the room while I watched Netflix or listened to music. I always listened to whatever I was watching through one headphone. This way, I had an open ear if anyone got up or started walking in the hallway. That night, I had gone through my routine and was laying in bed watching YouTube when the alarm to our house went off. It was the blaring to end all alarm, so the entire house was up and ready to go. My primary concern, which I realize is ridiculous, was not that someone might be breaking into our house, it was that my parents might smell the residual wheat smell in my room. My dad poked his head through my door to make sure he knew where I was before he scoped the downstairs and turned off the alarm. When he knew I was okay, he asked me to go into his room with my mom. I don't think he noticed that my room's window was open. After he cleared the downstairs, he did a sweep of the front and backyard to make sure nobody was hiding in the shadows. He's pretty paranoid about most things, but honestly, I appreciated his thoroughness. He came back up, told us that he didn't find anything, and we all went back to bed. I went back to my room and debated whether or not I should close my window. Stupidly, I decided not to. I figured my dad had swept the yard, so it was fine. Plus, my parents were awake and would probably freak out if they heard my window sliding closed. I decided to wait a bit and let them get a little less conscious before making any window-related noise. About 15 minutes later, just as I was about to get up and close my window, the alarm goes off again. My dad rushes downstairs to turn it off just as I slide my window closed and push both locks back in place. A few minutes pass and my dad comes and knocks on my door. I open it and he tells me, "Hey, I think it's just the wind. Don't worry about the alarm." It had been a pretty windy night, 20 to 30 miles per hour, and the door had a little give in its locking mechanism. It could be pulled about half an inch before you felt the lock. So we both decided to write it off for the time being. The next morning, my dad decides to check the alarm system's app on his phone. To our horror, it showed the door being opened and closed 14 times before the alarm triggered the first time. Like I said before, it's a heavy door. We've had windier nights and never had the alarm triggered or seen the sensor opened and closed 14 times. My dad was telling our next-door neighbor about what had happened the night before, trying to figure out if it actually could have been the wind. Our neighbor told us that in fact he'd caught somebody briefly entering his backyard on his security camera. He told us he'd probably freaked out once he saw the camera and moved on to our house. Just imagining whoever it was standing at our back door, right below my open window, triggering the alarm. Hiding somewhere and probably watching my dad scope out the backyard and then doing it all again while I laid oblivious in my bed was enough to stop me from my midnight smoke sessions entirely. After this, we had a series of weird events happen at midnight. The next night, a woman rang our doorbell at the stroke of midnight, literally, and gave my dad his wallet, which he hadn't realized he'd been missing. A few nights later, the alarm triggered at the back door again, and then on Christmas Eve, I was home alone while my family was at the midnight church service and the alarm triggered twice, back to back, in a disturbingly similar time span as it had the first night. That time I didn't bother asking which door had been triggered. I didn't want to know. I took away a fairly simple life lesson: lock your doors, lock your windows, and set your house alarm even if you think you're safe. 2. Bit of background. This occurred about 3 years ago when I was 22 years old, and I was working at a fast food place with fried chicken galore. Anyways, onto the story. I had been working at fried chicken restaurant for about a year. During that time, an older co-worker, who I'll refer to as CC, for Chicken Creeper, would get very friendly with me. I believe this man was in his mid-30s at the time, about 5'8" and of Latino descent. He was actually a shift leader, so would be in charge of me during shifts. I relatively thought he was a nice guy at first, until he started getting too chummy with me. It would start out completely innocent. He'd make friendly conversation with me about various topics, and I would do the same. I actually liked working with him in the beginning. He was easy to talk to and wouldn't berate me if I made a few mistakes while working. I would also vent to him about annoying customers that I had to serve. Well, after he had gotten comfortable with me, he would get touchy as well. He would poke my sides sometimes and my stomach. I don't particularly like older men touching me like that, especially if he's my supervisor at work. Almost everyone at my workplace, though, would act very close with one another, so I assumed it meant nothing, despite my discomfort. He would often poke me when no one else was around, which should have alerted me to how creepy his actions were. He would later make comments of how pretty I was, and would ask questions about my boyfriend and I regularly. Simple questions like, "Do you live together? Are you going to get married soon? How old is he?" Stuff like that. There was this one night I came in to pick up my check from work. It was my day off, and I was wearing makeup and a short spaghetti string dress. One of my shift leaders greeted and went to get my check. Cece was also working and came out to say hi to me. He noticed my outfit and said I looked sexy. Ew. I'd rather not have my supervisor refer to me as sexy, please. I just smiled and chuckled awkwardly, got my check and left. There would be other times when I was working that he got close to me and would stroke my face with his hand. I shivered and found an excuse to walk away. At this time I was wondering if I should say something to my manager. There were cameras at work placed everywhere, so maybe some of his creepy antics were caught on video. I decided against it, though, and would confide to my friends about it instead. They also found Cece's actions creepy and said I should tell my boyfriend about it. I didn't feel I had to, though, because I didn't think that Cece had done that much harm. I also really hate conflict, and thought that my boyfriend would try to convince me to tell my manager. A few weeks before I decided to leave the fried chicken place, Cece did something I found to be very inappropriate. I was working that day and had just ended my shift. We were allowed to have drinks from the soda dispenser machine using the restaurant's to-go cups, as long as we kept them in the walk-in freezer in the back. I had gotten a drink that day and walked to the back to finish it and throw away the cup, because I hate when people just leave their cups there for others to throw away. Little did I know, though, that Cece was there as well. I had started to avoid being alone in secluded parts of the restaurant with him, because that's usually when he would try to touch me. I was startled when I saw him because I didn't see him walk in there beforehand. He asked me if I was leaving for the day, and I said, "Yes, I am." He asked, "Why? Why can't you stay longer?" He would often ask me this when I was done working for the day, and I always say because I'm tired and I want to go home to sleep. He would usually just say, "Okay, bye." But this time he did something different. This time he walked over to me and kissed me on the forehead. This disturbed me, but me being so non-confrontational, I just smiled weakly, grabbed the cup, and hurried out. I told a couple friends about this and they got upset for me, and found Cece pretty revolting for doing this. They again told me to tell my boyfriend, but I didn't want to upset him and kept it to myself. I eventually told him about a year later, and he was shocked and upset that I had not told him while it was happening. I told him I didn't want to tell him because I thought he might confront Cece or my manager about it. I feel the saddest part about this was he was actually married with children, and that she worked alongside us as well. His wife was also a shift leader, and I always found her pleasant to work with. I honestly didn't even know Cece was married, let alone that she was nearby working with us all the time. I was so surprised when she had told me while we were working together. She had mentioned she had a husband, and I asked her how long they were together for. She said 15 years, I believe, and that they have been working together in the same chicken place all this time. Astonished, I then asked her who her husband was, and she replied that it was Cece. I commented, "Really?" And she said, "Yeah, how did you not know that? I said that I didn't really ask people those questions because I don't like prying in people's personal lives, unless they're okay with it. She then stated how they had 3 kids as well. I felt so guilty about it, wondering if I should tell her about her husband's flirtatious, wretched ways. I decided against it, though, feeling it might strain their marriage and fearing she might not believe me anyway. To my Kentucky Fried Creeper, I hope we do not work together ever again. 3. This story dates back to July last year. It has enough weirdness that I find myself puzzling over exactly what happened quite regularly. My friends' reactions sometimes make me wonder if this is just a big ol' self-gaslighting experience. But yet, when I go over the details, there is enough deep weirdness that it leaves only 2 real options. I'll let you be the judge. Anyway, a few years ago, my best friend Toby took a cross-country grad position in Brisbane. A big tumultuous thing for our group of friends, and amid the 3 a.m. power-drunk confessionals, and promises not to lose touch, was a promise of the road trip. However, life found a way to make our drunk promises seem very disingenuous, and 18 months later, we'd hardly spoken, barring a few crowded hours where he'd flown over for a family obligation. Eventually, the stars aligned mid-July last year, and myself, Toby, and 2 other friends, Chris and Alec, were able to get the band back together, so to speak. Queensland is a weird mix of tropical paradise, dead space, crocodiles, and genuine social backwardness. Cheers to you, One Nation. Queensland is very, very much the Florida of Australia. Australia is fucking huge. Not just huge, but vast and extremely empty. There is on average 3.1 people every square kilometre, and 90% of those people live in 7 or 8 major cities. If you think Reddit is an echo chamber, you've never had the pleasure of sinking a few cooling frothies with the good old boys in outback Queensland. The Australian geography makes it really easy to get 100% removed from society, and it's something I often appreciate about this country, but the distance can be daunting at times, because if things go wrong, nothing is close. Everything is amplified by distance. Our plan was to fly in, cram 4 dudes and 2 weeks' worth of supplies into Toby's family sedan, and straight book it, 1,600 kilometers north from Brisbane to Cairns. Being fiscally unendowed, on a time schedule, and outdoors inclined, we opted to keep driving most nights until we found an interesting and free campsite to pitch up in, which was a complex process of cross-referencing driver fatigue with the relative passive-aggressiveness of campsite comments on the Wikicamps app. Worth every single penny if you ever travel Australia. Generally speaking, we opted for road stops, but one night, after staying too late in a particularly nice town, 1770 if anyone is playing at home, and reading a few particularly average reviews of the rest stop up the road, we decided to go off-piste and camp at an unmarked but seemingly well-known campsite. Around 9 p.m. we took a left off the highway, followed the Wikicamps directions towards our campsite, about 2.5 kilometers away from the Bruce Highway. Despite the remoteness, we found the campsite, a small 30-meter clearing between the banks of an apparently croc-filled river and tall gum trees, already occupied by a single caravan, attached to a 4-wheel drive. Being quite familiar with camping, I felt a little awkward intruding on what I'm sure the caravan owner assumed was a private spot, well after dark, and made a mental note to smooth over any grievances with a cup of tea and a g'day, should we see the owners before we left. We started setting up camp despite the frustratingly gravel-thick soil. Have you ever tried to beat a tent peg into rock? We weren't being particularly loud, but must however have attracted our neighbor's attention, because he flung open the caravan door within 2 minutes of us arriving, and started one of the weirdest conversations I've ever had. Expecting a grey nomad, look it up, couple and a please keep it down, I was a little surprised by the 55-ish, bushy-bearded man that approached us. He seemed erratically drunk, and asked us if we had a bong, which we did not. I offered him a beer and he asked us where we were from. We mentioned Perth. He asked our names. We went around the group. I asked his name, and he said, "Oh, don't worry about that." He then cleared his throat and made a joke.
You know, I'm a great gay prostitute.
Mutual unexpected statement silence.
Yeah, I'm great. But the other boys don't enjoy it as much.
It is also important to note that Chris and Alec were not particularly interested in this conversation, preoccupied with tents. Minimal attention was being paid. Toby had made more of an effort to engage, but was tending to his swag, and I was more or less solely engaged in the conversation. Despite the shit joke, which I chalked up to different cultural sensitivities, I asked him if he minded us camping here and what he was up to tonight. He replied,
"Oh no, I'm just watching the State of Origin,
rugby.
You know, I have trouble making friends."
Pondered for 10 seconds or so and followed up with,
"I used to have a good friend, but he was a cross-dresser, so I had to kill him."
He said it so naturally that my general human statement interpreter again thought it was an off-joke, and auto-response had already kicked in by the time I realized what he just said. "Oh, how far is the river from here? Are we in range of any crocs?" I asked before my brain could work out why.
"Oh, only about 150 meters that way, with the shallow graves. You know, my friend knows where some shallow graves are up in Harvey Bay. But yeah, you know, being out here alone, I wouldn't worry about the crocs. You promise not to kill me if I promise not to kill you."
This was enough to trigger my dumb lizard brain, and a very rapid understanding of danger kicked in. "Oh, do you think Queensland will win the State of Origin?" "It would be embarrassing to lose all 3 games. What's the score anyway?" I asked in an attempt to show I'm less scared of the snake than it is of me.
"Good point. Just come knock if you want some bourbon, boys,"
he said, and he walked the 10 meters to his cabin. I immediately turned to Toby and asked how much of that conversation he'd heard. He said not much, but enough to be a little bit shaken. I asked if Toby had caught our bearded friend's name, and he replied he had not. I immediately insisted to my friends that we take a walk to the river, despite Alec repeatedly saying, "I'll be there in 5, just let me finish my tent." I made it very clear that we needed to see the river right goddamn now. In the very remote dark, we huddled around a smartphone torch, and I explained the conversation I'd just had with our nameless mate. Alec and Chris, again, heard only this guy being friendly and asking our names, and certainly did not understand why I was being so edgy. Despite my being fully aware that we were in an actual horror movie, I agreed to keep setting up and wait to see if anything happened. I immediately started scoping sizable rocks to use in a mano-a-mano fight to the death, should it come down to it. 10 seconds after considering what a mano-a-mano rock fight would actually consist of, I asked Toby what we should do if our mate Mick Taylor happened to have a gun. He paused very briefly and then very quietly, aggressively, pronounced we were getting the fuck out of there. And so we packed up extremely rapidly, one eye on the caravan at all times, and despite protestations from Alec, we got the fuck out of there. I still have no idea if this guy was trying to play a big old joke on 4 mid-20s guys, or if there is something more sinister to it. You can get away with a lot when no one is looking, and there aren't a whole lot of people looking in rural Queensland. Either way, I'd rather not meet again. Hey everybody, Hellfreezer here, and thank you very much for listening to 3 True Scary Stories, episode 402. And thank you very much to everybody who allowed me to use their stories in this video. Well, I'm actually doing, as I record these videos, it's currently 1 minute past 2 on a Friday morning, which is better than usually I do. I always tell myself, okay, on Thursday I'm going to take care of whatever business I've got to take care of. Usually it consists of going out doing a little bit of grocery shopping. Lately it's involved also a brief trip down to the hospital to pick up some of the stuff for my psoriasis. And then I'll have a few hours to relax, and I'll start working about 8 or 9 o'clock. That usually means I start working about 4 or 5 in the morning. But got started a lot earlier today, so I'm getting more done. So yay me, go Hellfreezer, well done. And I am especially motivated because, as I will probably have already mentioned, Good Omens premiered at this, I believe it was midnight, in the UK, I think, in a number of other territories as well. I know there's a few places in the US that went up. So there's 6 episodes of Good Omens to watch and enjoy. And that I'm very much motivated to get done early, so I can sit myself down, make some snacks, and start watching them. Because I knew they were up on Friday. I just didn't think they'd be up till a little bit later. And with that, I'm going to head off for now. So until next time, thank you very much for listening, and take very good care of yourselves.